Guys, welcome back to the show. ZDogg MD, Dr. Vinay Prasad. You know who he is. You kind of know who I am. We're just going to talk about stuff and things, especially the madness around coronavirus and our response to coronavirus.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah. I came here just to, I really enjoy our conversations, even if it's just you and I, actually.
It's true. Yeah. Like now, because we're not really neighbors, like we're actually enough out of the way that we have to make a point of you coming by, but I just look forward to it. I'm like, I'm just going to hang out with a dude that I agree with. You know what's funny? So somebody called me out.
Oh boy.
On, I don't know if it was Twitter or Facebook. And they were like, I've noticed that most of your guests are Indian. Is this a racial bias issue towards your own tribe? And I'm like, Indians don't even accept me because I'm actually a Zoroastrian. Right, we're like a minority group in India. And then I look back and I was like, it was you, Monica Gandhi, Jay Bhattacharya. I'm like, something's happening here.
Were you profiling?
I'm profiling. You know, it's like I'm like a TSA agent. I only pick the brown people to go deep on.
Scared to even laugh at that joke.
I know, right? You're going to get canceled just for laughing. Yeah. So what's been going on, man? It's been
just laughing for the record, I'm just laughing to make you feel good about that joke. No,
yeah, because you can't even make a joke on Twitter now about anything without the danger of being canceled.
I think people are in a quite humorless state, if you ask me. Yeah. I mean, I think that tensions are high. Nobody wants to admit it, but of course, everyone to some degree is suffering emotionally, I think, with quarantine, with month after month of pandemic. And when tensions are high, humor is a lacking commodity.
It's a lacking commodity, yet we can employ it to disarm. However, now it's like you cannot. Everybody's on pins and needles. Like, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to offend such and such and so and so and such and such and so and so? Like, someone tried to cancel the white coat investor on Twitter. Like, when that starts, when you're canceling a financial dude who's like the most boring person on the planet, like, how are you going to cancel we've reached peak madness. And I think COVID is contributing a little bit.
COVID is. I mean, there's something in the air that says, when you're cooped up all day at home, I think like the Romans and the Gladiator, what do? They had those Colosseum events and somebody got killed at the end of the day. And the modern Colosseum, the modern gladiation is you find somebody who said something wrong and off with their head, one way or the other, either through their professional employment, through public shaming, something like that. It keeps us all engaged. We all having popcorn saying, well, I hate to be that person, even though to some degree, some of us should have a little bit of sympathy because, to judge somebody based on one comment they made that may or may not be taken out of context, I think is quite cruel, actually. I strongly disagree with this culture that we're in.
This culture is, I like that term gladiation, because that's what it is. It's you're about scoring points in a ring for entertainment and for credibility and for reputational points. Because humans are reputational creatures. We're built around what's our public reputation, how are we seen in the tribe, because it's life or death for us. If we say the wrong thing and our reputation is damaged, we don't get hunting privileges, we don't get to have sex, we don't get to get food. So historically, it's hardwired in us. And so we've weaponized it through social media. And then COVID descends like a pall on the whole thing and weaponizes it further because everyone's like, we're hyper emotional. We're deprived of physical contact with people. And which gets me to this whole, we live in California.
Yes.
It's starting to feel a little bit insane now because the pendulum swings from, hey, let's open up, and no, you can't go outside on a trail with a mask. You can't have outdoor dining. How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so I think for the listeners who aren't immersed in California, we've had a number of new restrictions come through in the face of rising case counts. And of course, I think you and I would want to do whatever's reasonable necessary to keep cases under control. But some of the things we're doing just don't make a lot of sense. One of which is closing playgrounds. One of which is, I think, closing outdoor dining, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't see clear and convincing evidence that those actions are going to bend the case curve downward. And that's important. I mean, I think this is something people don't understand. You only get to make so many rules. There's only so much energy out there that you can get people to comply with whatever you want them to comply with. Beyond that, you're blowing your energy, your political capital, and you're not getting anything back. And so I think you can have irrational, excessive policies. I would say closing playgrounds is probably top of that list. It's just going to piss off parents. It's going to make everyone frustrated. And we don't have good evidence that that's where the virus is spreading. So why are you doing that? I think it's really something that has brought a lot of people out of the woodwork, public health experts, to say, what are you doing, California?
It is the opposite of harm reduction. What you're doing is you're creating a kind of pandemic fatigue. You're creating authority fatigue, and you have no respect now for the authorities because you're like, this just makes no sense. Like Scott Adam, who wrote Dilbert, used to say, if there's a rule, like a business rule that makes no sense, like it really causes straight demoralization. And Elon Musk took it the next step and was like, listen, if there's something that makes you feel like you're in a Dilbert cartoon, maybe we should readdress that rule. Well, so, not being able to go on a trail, not being able to eat outdoors. First of all, it's punishing these small businesses. It's economically devastating, and there's no science behind it. So why? But then they'll say follow the science.
Follow the science, but this is I think is not science based.
Right.
But can I tell you a little story that you remind me of? Many years ago, I think I was like a fellow at the NIH. I had to do a rotation in Washington D.C. And you got to get like a DC training license. And I remember you had to do a lot to get this training license. You had to fill out all these forms online and submit them. And then the last step was you had to go get fingerprinted. And so I filled out all these forms. And the last step was book your fingerprinting appointment. I was booked it for Tuesday. And I go down there on Tuesday and I got my fingerprint appointing. I sent in all the forms and I get there and the guy's like, I'm sorry, sir, you can't get fingerprinted. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we haven't received your forms. I was like, what are you talking about? It's an electronic submission. You have them. And he was like, no, see what happens is the forms go in, it goes to a printer, it gets printed out. And then I open this folder, I put the forms in the folder. And only after the folder has been opened and you have the forms in the folder, can you come and get fingerprinted added to the folder. And so I said, let me ask you, why can't you just take one of those folders, put my name on it, fingerprint me, put that in the folder. When the forms print, you add it to the folder. You see what I'm saying? And he was like, oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. And I was like, this is why people's heads are going to explode. What sense does this make? And you and I know there's so many things in life and in medicine where you feel that frustration, where you're like, okay, why are you so adhering to rules that make no sense at all? And I think I'd put this in that category. Playgrounds closed. That's not going to bend the curve on the pandemic. It's just going to fatigue your populace. It's going to lead to resentment. And meanwhile, there are places in this country where they're going the other direction. They're not even doing basic things.
Like Florida, right?
Florida. I was just talking to that friend of mine in Florida who was telling me, that this gentleman went out to lunch. And I said, oh, where'd you eat? And he's like, I had lunch with my friend indoors. And I was like, what do you mean indoors? He's like, indoor dining? And he's like, yeah, we have indoor dining in Florida. And I said, he's like, well, don't worry. We have to wear masks if we get up to go to the bathroom. I was like, oh, yeah, that's gonna stop it.
Because that's when it happens.
That's when it happens.
When your bladder's full. It's like, oh, well, that's what the science
is. That's when COVID leaps.
Follow the science.
Follow the science,
Vinay. Yeah. But this is, the reason I like talking to you, the reason we hang out at all professionally is that I think we fancy ourselves just rationalists. Let's just actually use some clear thinking. There's no political bent here. It's just, hey, but yet everything's politicized now. Everything is weaponized. And I think what happened was early on, I think LA Times had a piece on this morning that I thought actually kind of captured the zeitgeist of this. I'm not even using that word, right? But I'm going to use it. I
think you are.
It's a big word. Am I? Good. All right. I have the blessing. So it said early on when the administration was kind of blowing off, hey, don't worry about this thing, when everything's fine, whatever. The public health authorities decided, well, to counter that, we're going to get really absolutist because we need to say, hey, no, in no uncertain terms, you need to do this. All right, fine. And the problem was then both of them are speaking in relatively absolute terms, which the public is going to have a very short patience for, especially when you're going to do a lockdown, but you're not going to support the businesses or you're not going to support essential workers in a way that is meaningful. So you do a half-ass lockdown initially with absolute public health messaging that's just this, and then it changes. Actually masks. And then now what you're doing is the public health guys still are in that mindset and they're like, okay, it's just say no. It's just like drugs, complete abstinence. So we don't want you socializing. We don't want you traveling. We don't want you going to Thanksgiving. We don't want you going to Christmas. We want you to sit down, stay home, and bend the curve because otherwise lives.
Yes. And I think you're putting it so well that it's getting worse and worse. And I think it started out perhaps well-intentioned. There were some people who came out there and said, let's do some sensible things. This pandemic is coming. Gosh, we've got to get ahead of this. And then there were a few people out there who, maybe were frank COVID denialists. 5G causes COVID, or there's no COVID, right?
There's no COVID.
There's no COVID.
That's my favorite one.
That's my favorite, yeah. Okay, there's no COVID. Okay, well, all right. Well, that's a tough one.
Come talk to my friends in the hospital.
Right, I know. Yeah, that's something where I don't know where we're gonna start this debate.
Right.
But in response to that, I think on the other end, there were people who said it's not enough that COVID is extremely lethal in 80-year-olds and extremely lethal in 70-year-olds and 60-year-olds and 50-year-olds. It's not enough that it's really bad in older age groups and for people with comorbidities. It's got to be the worst thing imaginable.
Right.
And so they started escalating. And so now, one of the best things about COVID, thank God, was it's not very lethal among kids. But then they said, well, it causes Kawasaki-like syndrome or causes, this
MISC,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, but what's the denominator? I mean, yes, of course, but what's the denominator? It's a risk. It's rare. It's horrible if it happens. You don't want it to happen, but it's still quite unlikely to happen. Thank God.
Right.
They started talking about myocarditis. The 20-year-old, even though they recovered asymptomatic, well, on MRI, on T2-weighted MRI, they've got some spots on the MRI. And so, what does that mean? I don't know, but it doesn't sound good to me. Sounds scary.
And it's scary. And the thing is, we don't MRI everyone who's had flu or Coxsackie virus or whatever it is.
If I put you in an MRI every day, I promise you'd be missing some organs by the end of the year. You're going to find something and then somebody's going to be trigger happy. It's like, cut that out.
Absolutely.
I don't know what that
Adrenaloma, something else.
Of course.
Incidentallomas, they call them. 1,000%. And it's funny. So I was talking I just interviewed Paul Offit and we had a great conversation. Yeah. He really elucidated a lot of good ideas around these mRNA vaccines that are coming out. And he's sitting on the committee and,
as I see that, he's
wink, the data I've seen. And I mean, this is a positive vibe coming from the dude, which is interesting because early on he was quite skeptical because he's made vaccines and he's like, we've never made them like this. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be insane if we see it within a year. Now we're going to see it within a year, which means that
greatest success story of the 2020. Yeah.
It really is. And he's willing to say that. He's like, hey, I give the administration credit. I give it. And he's like, that's a scientist. He did say something though that I think was new for him, which he said, this is a scary virus. We don't know how it's, with these children with this inflammatory thing, these long haulers, this and that. So, and I think he was saying that to try to make a case that you should get vaccinated even if you don't think you're going to die. Mm-hmm. Now, he would not have said that, I think. And again, I don't mean to...
No, go on, yeah.
I'm just using this as an example.
He would not have said that had there not been people denying it.
Had there not been people denying it and had it not been about a vaccine, if it was about just let's open schools, he would have said, well, actually, on balance, schools being open is better for the health of children than the detriment of being infected with COVID. Yeah. So it's all contextual. So he's a very nuanced communicator and thinker. But the way our public health apparatus works is it's just catastrophization or just straight minimalization if it's, Atlas or someone.
And if you're on social media and you start to toss things out in this space, catastrophization, minimization, or something in the middle, as you start you'll just see yourself being rewarded for the worse it is, more tweets, retweets, more likes. Yeah. Worse it is. And you see people just drifting in that direction. Or somebody starts drifting in the other direction to where this is a nothing burger. This makes, So you can watch the rewards pull people to polls. The people in the middle who, take it seriously, want to do reasonable things, but don't want to be excessive, want to properly budget how much energy people have for restrictions. That is something that's very difficult to build. It's not rewarded. I think it's a deep problem.
I agree. And what's interesting is that's a social media construction. When I've actually met people, because people will come up to me, oh, you're a doctor? Oh, well, so what do you think? This COVID thing's a hoax, right? I mean, I read this and I read that. I mean, what do you think about it? You can have a nuanced conversation with someone who's been weaponized against COVID being real with 5 minutes. You can, because you're person to person and you understand, you can vibe on the body language and go, this person's not trying to fool me. This person's not a bad person. They've been confused online. And that works, but we don't get to do that on Twitter because you get rewarded for exactly the opposite. You get rewarded for catastrophizing, like, stay home, and then, hashtag you're a loser if you don't wear a mask. And it's like, well, but actually that's not helpful. That's a just say no argument.
So I recently tweeted and got a little bit of backlash. Yeah, I recently tweeted that it was a link to a news story about rising cases in Miami-Dade County, and I said, my friend tells me that you can have a lunch indoors in a restaurant in Florida. Meanwhile, we're one step away from a mask mandate in the shower in California. thought it was funny too.
That's comedy.
I thought it was good.
The shower mask mandate.
The shower mask mandate.
Right.
But, it's a joke, but it's not that far from things we've seen. There is a mandate in Washington State for children who are playing outdoors to wear a mask while participating in outdoor sports activities, which is, I don't know if you've been to Seattle this time of year, but let's just say they don't got the sun that we do. It's a pretty damp state. So that really is a water-based mask mandate, which is, I would say, unlikely to be effective or useful at anything other than frustrating children and parents who are trying to keep the mask on the kids. So I made my joke. Oh boy. And then and then somebody texted me, like, oh, people aren't going to like your joke or something, or people aren't liking your joke. And I took a look because I'm actually quite disciplined about, I try not to look at what these people are saying back to me, because I don't want it to affect me.
What do you mean these people, Vinay?
These people. I mean,
yeah, that's racist.
These people. Well, thankfully, people of all races, shapes, and sizes
hate you equally,
hate or love. It's
right,
one or the other. Depends on the day of the week.
Right.
I try not to let the emotions of the most vocal among us guide my internal compass. I try to keep it based on discourse,
rational discourse. Yeah.
Right. So I looked and there's all these people oh, this is so objectionable, this is bad, but I'm like, oh my God, can't you take a joke? And there's some truth in the joke, actually. If you really think about the joke, like all good jokes, there's a lesson to learn. And the lesson is you should do what matters. So maybe we shouldn't have indoor dining, with masks on the way to the restroom. But maybe we shouldn't close playgrounds. Maybe we shouldn't have those masks in outdoor wet environments, recommendations that just sap our morale.
Right.
And so it's a joke that rings true to a lot of us.
Perfect. Yeah. In my mind, it's the perfect
joke.
It's a perfect satirical comment.
Yes, satirical.
Right? You're saying, listen, I'm going to point out through humor what is true and make you look at it. And the fact that people are upset is interesting to me because I think, and this fits your typical, because you said something right in the beginning of this, which is, I got a text.
Yeah.
Now, this is usually my threshold. When I get a text about a tweet or some social media post, that's when I know it's like, in The Matrix, when Agent Smith in the second movie, he escapes from the Matrix and starts causing havoc in the real world.
Yes.
That's when you realize, oh, something has escaped from the Twitter matrix or the Facebook matrix and is out in the world texting me, which means now I have to take this seriously, which is upsetting because this is just dumb on Twitter. And then now it's like, oh, this is somehow going to affect my life because something I said has triggered an audience primed to try to get social points by attacking back. Mm-hmm. And it's hurt no one. It's a joke. You can disagree and you can argue with it, but why cancel the person, right? Because if you were with me, you wouldn't want to cancel me because you'd realize I was a decent person.
Of course, and it was a good joke.
It was a good joke.
It was a damn good joke, and there's a lot of truth in it. I think we have seen several examples, I think, of people getting attacked personally. And, if we were trying to put specific concrete to what it means to be canceled, I think it means to complain to someone's employer, to seek out people they know in the real world and badmouth them and try to get them facing some sort of censor or punishment or retribution in the real world for something said online. It's absolutely fair to reply to the tweet and say, I disagree with this, or this doesn't make me laugh, or, something that somebody who's not funny would say. But if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you start to bring it into the real world, I think that's where people think the threshold should be extremely high. And one should wonder if by doing that, you're actually helping some cause. In this case, I don't know what they would be thinking they'd help. But I'm actually not too worried about this because I think any sensible person would understand that I actually have quite a point, I think. And I'm happy to defend that point and argue about that point if anyone wants to dialogue about it.
It is this idea of affecting people in the real world for their opinions, for their speech is fascinating. It's one thing to cancel, say, okay, I don't want, as an advertiser, I don't want to put my name on somebody who's saying something that I fundamentally disagree with. Okay, then you're voting with your dollars. That's fine. But what's happened to me in the past, which is fascinating, I've said things like, I think everyone should practice at the top of their training. Mm-hmm. Okay, that apparently is a dog whistle for give nurse practitioners and PAs independent practice apart from doctors, which I've never said. And I actually don't agree with that.
Oh, that's
I think,
interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that topic,
so
that's
that whole thing, said something like that. And then a bunch of doctors started attacking me. And these are doctors that are on these very weaponized Facebook groups like Physicians for Patient Protection. They have these very elegant names like that. And what they decided was they get together, they form a mob. And remember, they already don't like you. So there's always some pre-existing.
That's what I wanted to bring up with you. Yes.
Right?
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because there's a pre-existing, I'll tell the story, then we'll go into that, because there's, like any mob, there's a pre-existing grudge. So, oh, such and such did this to me once, or Z-Dog once made a video that offended me, or I just hate that guy because he doesn't have to see patients all day to make a living, and I do.
Or he's successful at what he does.
Even worse.
No, but I mean, that is a common grudge people do bear, is that they view you as a successful person. I think all of us view ourselves as some degree of success and some degree of things that we feel like we have yet to succeed in.
Abject imposter syndrome, yeah.
Everybody has that, no matter how successful they are.
Right.
I've talked to people who are deans or, whatever, presidents, university, they all feel like, well, I should have gotten, everyone has that feeling. But somebody else may look at you and see somebody successful, and they may resent you simply because of the success that they see in you, which I think is a very petty emotion, a very childish emotion.
And also very human. It's common and reputational. And so what ends up happening is they then leave the matrix and they start calling up people on my website where I'm going to be speaking. And they're like, we're doctors and we think this guy is a poison and so on. And so these people would then call me and say, we have a bunch of doctors complaining about you. We'd like to cancel the talk that you were scheduled to do, which, this is how, at that time, I was monetizing all of this. Like, that's how I paid for all this equipment before we had a supporter tribe. Right. And so that was like, it would be like a direct financial hit. Of course, yeah. Like, you're being canceled. Yeah. Except that in my contracts, I always put that the 50% deposit is non-refundable, which means I just got paid half of the talk to not do anything.
It's the dream.
And that is the dream. So what I'm saying is you can immunize yourself a little bit against this, but you also have to say, listen, I'm willing to die on my sword financially to say something that I think is important.
Yeah. And I think to your point, which is that when one investigates beyond people who are critical of somebody online, one often finds a pattern that these two individuals have interacted before and disagreed on a number of diverse topics. And what does that say to me? That says to me that some of the disagreement in the moment may be disingenuously applied. It may actually be pre-existing grievance or disagreement. Why is that important? I think if we want to judge someone fairly based on whatever they did, even if we disagree with what they did and want to punish them for what they did, it should be based on the merits of that individual instance and case, and not based on how, Tom treated Tim, 4 years ago on some other topic, and they've got some beef between the two of them. But you don't see all that on social media. And many of the people who cast the first stone are people who have a pre-existing grievance.
What's funny is it's no different than middle school politics weaponized. And that's why I think middle school girls have such a hard time now with social media. They're more anxious, they're more depressed, they're more suicidal, because these little grievances, like such and so and gossip, now become truly a thing that you cannot escape from no matter where you are. So you can be at home and it's still happening because it's reaching you through the phone.
Yes, and there's no distance. And
none of that.
Yeah. You brought up the interesting question about should nurse practitioners practice independently, and somebody might Google me and see I've written actually in support of that practice, and I'll tell you my 2-cent argument.
Oh, we're gonna get so canceled. I'm disavowing anything he says right now. No, keep going.
Okay, the gist of my argument is that all practitioners exist on a spectrum, from people who are extremely savvy and very independent and highly competent, and people who need some assistance, need some guidance, some supervision. Right. And I think that we focus so much on the median differences between groups of people based on their training background, be it NP, PA, or MD, or DO. We focus so much on those median differences, we forget that the variability within the group is often quite large. And I would say we probably need a system that would think about both ends a little bit more clearly. So by that I mean the people who are lagging, whether they're an MD or a DO or an NP or a PA, who need a little guidance and supervision, we probably need a system where we better detect that and provide them that guidance. And the people who are the all-stars in whatever field, more freedom, more flexibility, more independence. Of course, the system we have now, it uses the degrees as a 100% surrogate for performance on the job. And I would think that probably, so my gist of my argument is that I think many NPs and PAs, should have independent practice authority. There needs to be some system to say, who should or shouldn't have it. MDs, of course, they all have independent practice authority, but on the MD side, maybe we'd say that there's some people on the back end who, we do a bad job in medicine of picking the low performers and remediating them. We have malpractice suits and things like that. Those randomly pick, somebody who did something often egregious, and give them the death penalty.
Right.
But the average person doing a poor job is just like skates undetected for their whole career. And so that's the gist of how I think about it.
Now, see, this to me, what you just did was you described everybody should practice at the top of their ability.
Which is what you said.
Yeah. And I said training. What I should have said is ability.
Yeah.
Because that is, when I talk about this health 3.0 idea, it's everybody on the team practicing at the top of their abilities in service of not just the patient, because that's narrow, in service of each other as well. So that means that if you have an all-star PA, and we all know that PA or that several PA, they ought to be given as much meritocracy-based license as they can, whereas the idiotic MD who went to a top school who you wouldn't let touch your dog, and we all know that person, Dr. Death, what is it, Hands of Death and Destruction, and those people get to do whatever they want. And we don't have a process like pilots have where they mentor each other and they test each other, and instead it's CME, which is nonsense, and board re-upping, which is just a way to make money for these companies like ABIM, which is a total scam.
And built into sort of, I think, what you're articulating, I would even say that there are a lot of really good doctors, really good NPs who just get burdened with paperwork and menial tasks, in part because hospital systems and health systems profit more from burdening these providers. And I think your philosophy would say, take away that menial task that we can offload to other entities and let them really thrive. Because one of the things about being a doctor that we love is when you get to do what you're really, really good at. And that often is making those critical medical decisions, sitting down with people, having the long conversations. I don't think it's necessarily doing the stupid billing and then the paperwork. And let's not say that those 4-letter word, epic, but
well, again, what you said is exactly this. Everybody should practice at the top of their ability. Instead, what we do is we make them practice like a clerk or a data entry analyst, and so we do all this. And when I talk about Health 3.0, I say we are technology enabled but never enslaved. And what that means is we're not serving the technology. We're not serving Epic as data entry. Epic is serving us to take that off our plate so that we can do what only we can do. And there's some things that only a absolutely highly trained physician with 10,000 hours and specialty training can do. Nobody else can touch them. Let them do that.
Like neurosurgery.
Sure. You're not going to have a neurosurgery PA do the full surgery because it's just not within the parameters, right? But could a primary care nurse practitioner, a family nurse practitioner, do a lot of stuff good in the world with their training? Absolutely, especially if they're good, right? And this is the thing. And so what I've found is, this is what bothers me, is the people who are really activist on both sides of this.
Yes.
So there's activist nurse practitioner and the activist doctors. All of them are practicing at the bottom of their license. Like the doctors are angry because the nurse practitioners are taking their money.
Yes, I know.
It's like, well, what are you doing?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, that it's really sort of similar to all the issues we've discussed, where there's these polar extreme views that everyone, no matter what your license, should have full authority to do everything.
Right.
Or the only person who should ever do anything is an MD. And what we're talking about is something in between that acknowledges that people have different strengths and weaknesses, and different people are more or less capable than other people. And the system should find some way to evaluate things and make the same decisions we make for patients, individual and personalized decisions about what people can and can't do. And actually, we'd be better off for it, because right now I think we're failing because there is really no oversight for huge chunks of medical care that if somebody looked through, they'd be like, what the hell is going on? Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. And I think there is this idea of not knowing what you don't know.
Yes, that's true.
And I think a lot of doctors who are on the side of, hey, don't give them independent nurse, they say, well, they just don't know what they don't know. And I think those representatives are the loudest in the let's have independent practice conversation, and you worry about that. The ones that are like, I'm not sure we're ready for independent PA or nurse practice yet. They're the ones that you want to give independent PA nurse practice, because they probably they have a degree of imposter syndrome, which is a good sign. They have a degree of self-introspection. Hey, medicine's hard, which means they're careful, they're thoughtful, they ask for help.
And the same, I think that's well put. And I think the same is true for doctors, because the longer I practice, I'm more and more comfortable with telling the fellow, you know what, this is how I've been taught and trained, and how 75% or 80% of doctors would approach this problem. But I think we need to delve a little bit deeper into why that has become the case, either historical or scientific. It reminds me of something. I was recently trying to explain how some, new cancer drug works. And of course, I was talking about some boring molecular pathway. And at some point, I got a little bit stuck, and I was like, oh, shoot, I don't know if I know exactly at this molecular level how this drug works. Because again, I'm not a laboratory biologist in every single topic. I mean, certainly I think I don't have that qualifications. And then I think the trainee with me was like, well, isn't understanding this very deep level of understanding how the drug works molecularly the thing that distinguishes doctors from mid-levels? I said, whoa, that's a bold claim. I would say, I think that's not actually it. I mean, I know people feel that way, or may feel that way, that our basic science training is somehow what distinguishes. I guess I would say that I think that that there may not be an absolute distinguishing characteristic, and that what maybe the real thing you want to talk about is what distinguishes good healthcare providers from those who are merely mediocre. And I would say, regardless of degree program, the thing that distinguishes good providers is they're always humble, they're always willing to say what they don't know and try to improve upon that for the next year, versus people who I think are going the bad direction where they think they know it all.
That's it. That's all it is. And we've done videos on Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes.
Yeah. And this idea that when you don't know what you don't know, you cause trouble and you overestimate your knowledge. And when you know a lot, you underestimate your abilities, or you overestimate the abilities of others.
Yes.
And I've fallen sometimes into both traps. And what you see sometimes with, say, for example, let's just say a floor nurse. All right. So they have a certain education in immunology, et cetera. They can be very persuaded by anti-vaccine sort of online propaganda because it uses just enough scientific language that they know just enough but they don't know what they don't know, so they can't dig into the deeper rationale of why that argument doesn't make sense. Like the synectin thing. Have you heard this thing about?
I haven't, yeah.
This is an amazing one. So they're saying that the anti-vaccine thing is, these mRNA virus vaccines are creating a cross-reactive antibody with placental synectin, which is this, some compound in this placenta. And so therefore, getting vaccinated if you're a woman will sterilize you. Yeah, right? It makes you laugh right away. And yet but there's a plausibility. You're like, wait, this could happen. And then you have to think, okay, let's do 2 more steps of imagination. The wild type virus, which has by now infected tens of millions of people, has not created a case of female sterility that's been documented.
Yeah.
And that's going to have the same antibody production as this spike protein that's purified, and plus some. Convalescent plasma doesn't cause.
Yes.
So again, but they can't. But if you don't have that degree of abstraction, you can't make that. So again, you're in that valley of Dunning-Kruger, the peak of Dunning-Kruger, where you've overestimated your ability,
your confidence,
and therefore you're making mistakes. So this is what we ought to be teaching people: is how to think.
Yes, I think it's the poorest taught thing we do. And I mean, along those lines, let's just talk about medical education. There are some people you encounter in your medical education who you ask questions to, and you don't get a lot of answers. You get a lot of hostility. Remember those people?
Oh, yes.
My theory has always been that people display hostility when they actually themselves don't know the answer.
Of course.
And it's a great compensatory mechanism to get somebody to never ask you a question again.
Right.
And I do think that is, and I've written about it many times, but how do we restructure medical education? I think that the core aspect of medical education is, reasoning under uncertainty or partial certainty. And how do you think about that situation? Because a lot of our situations there's some uncertainty. And how do you interpret clinical trials, and how do you interpret pathophysiology, and how do you make decisions when those two are at odds? I think it's the poorest taught part of medical training, and that's in my interest, and of course the class that I teach.
Yeah. See, the nuance and the gray in not knowing everything, having uncertainty, is paralyzing for some people, and it can be taught. It can be taught how to deal with that. I always enjoyed it, the fact that you just don't know everything. So let's see how we're going to wind our way through the logic mill and thinking rationally and clearly, and then throwing a little emotion to make the final decision, because sometimes it's a toss-up. It's like, how do I feel in my gut now? It's 50-50. All right, I'm gonna go with this and see if it's right. If I'm wrong, then it reprograms my emotional gut for next time, right? People are so uncomfortable with that. And in fact, even my wife was uncomfortable with that in medicine. So she trained in internal medicine with me. We did 3 years together. She board certified with me, Stanford, internal medicine. And she's like, I hate this. Why do you hate this? Because it's so gray. We don't know anything. I like radiology. It's there. Yeah. The answer's there.
Or it's not there.
Or it's not there. Yeah. And so she did another 4 years of radiology. And now she's like this world-class chest radiologist at Stanford, because she saw what she was comfortable with.
But so, I wonder if you interviewed her again after practicing chest radiology for a long time, she'll actually say, it's grayer than I thought it was.
She will tell you, because I've had this conversation with her. She'll say, I'll say, I think a computer's going to replace you in 5 years.
She's like, no way.
And she's like, it won't happen in 50. And I'm like, why? You have no idea how gray. That's what she told me, how gray radiology is. But the beautiful thing is, I feel like I have the tools to navigate the grayness. In medicine, the grayness was, to her, a fog.
I see.
Because it's more human-based.
I see. It connects with the domains of uncertainty that she likes and she's good at.
That's right. That's what it is.
No, I mean, as somebody who spends a lot of time staring at radiographs, trying to make decisions about whether or not things are getting better or worse,
right?
And you think about, the story you heard, how people feel, the laboratory results, and the radiograph, and you're putting it all in, and you realize there is no oracle you can appeal to. At the end of the day, it is a judgment. It's a decision. You hopefully get better at it as you go through your career, but it's an important decision. I think it's a decision that I find very interesting and appealing, and I like to talk through, why I'm deciding the way I'm deciding.
And as a cancer doc, as a hem-onc doc, this is the apex of that sort of human synthesis of the uncertain with all these pieces. Because you said, how does a patient feel? What are the labs showing? And what's the radiograph showing? And then synthesize them through the filter of your experience with this particular malignancy and your experience with this particular patient. So,
To tie it back to COVID, we were talking about at the beginning, it has been my observation, although I have not empirically proven it, and maybe I should actually try to sit down and study it, that some of the people who get pulled to those draconian polls, the absolutist, stay in your room until 2022, or, or that doesn't exist at all, they don't have practical boots on the ground experience in this uncertain quagmire that clinicians find themselves, and probably people who go to sub-Saharan Africa to battle Ebola find themselves in. They can often be. I'll give you one example. I mean, I think there are people who do wonderful work on air ventilation in systems and aerosolization. They often have very strong and dogmatic views about how we should mitigate the air. But those views may not actually mesh with sort of empirical data.
Right.
There are people who may be doing epidemiologic modeling for many years. And they may have very precise, I've seen some estimates predicting how many people are going to get COVID to the person, 422,242. And you're like, oh God. I'm like, okay, you get it's not going to be right on the dot, but okay. All right. I get your point. But they have very dogmatic views. And then there are people who come into the debate about how mandates and policies work. And they may not know that, anytime you mandate something or make a policy, the intervention isn't the perfect world where everyone does what you say. It's what your recommendation does when it goes out into the ether. And one of the things you could do, it could piss off a lot of people. So you start taping up playgrounds, you piss them off, and then they start slacking on other fronts. But we who spend time in medicine, I think we know it very viscerally. You know what it's like in a primary care appointment. You see somebody for the first time. Can you imagine if you talked about all the things a primary care doctor is supposed to talk about on visit 1? They ain't going to be a visit 2, nope. Right? So we get some sense of what is realistic, what is practical, what is pragmatic, and what is really kind of unattainable.
Yeah, and it factors in multiple variables in a complex situation. And COVID is the perfect example. Anyone who tells you they know the answer, anyone who's giving you a black and white absolute, you should be very skeptical, no matter what side they're on. And yet we aren't. We actually tribalize towards those lines of reasoning. We're in the Osterholm group on, this, or we're on the Monica Gandhi group on, actually Monica is beautifully nuanced on most things.
I think she is.
She really is. And then you have the opposite group, the Scott Atlas group, which is like, hey, this is all economic. This is economic. And again, we talked about this last time. I actually think they're all coming from a place of, hey, I have a strong intuition about this based on my experience in these domains that are not the broadest domains. They're these domains. And I'm going to apply it to this, and I'm going to apply it in a very absolute way because I think I feel so strongly about this.
I got one topic for you that I don't know if you read about. Healthcare worker anecdotes in the age of COVID. Have you seen this article in Wired?
No, but it sounds right up the alley of what I get every single day.
This was a story about, I think, a nurse who said that many of the people, as they're in their final throes of COVID and dying, they say, "I can't believe it's real," or something like that.
Oh, yeah,
very
right.
Powerful anecdote.
Right.
And Wired investigated, like, is this true or not?
Right.
And they talked to other people in this hospital, and they're not vouching for the fidelity of this story. They really raised questions about whether or not the anecdote was faithful.
Right.
There's another example. I think some ED doctor talked about how he cared for a patient with COVID. He was a Jewish physician, and when they took the patient's shirt off, he had a swastika tattoo on the chest and SS tattoos on the arms.
This was Taylor Nichols, yeah.
And I saw some internet sleuth. Did you see this?
I didn't see this.
Some internet sleuth has identified several instances in the past where he has tweeted a very similar description of a patient he took care of a year ago, 2 years ago, and something beyond, I believe. You can go find the thread. And I guess it raises the question of whether or not there are multiple such people with these unique constellation of tattoos, or whether or not there is something about the present story that may or may not be fully accurate.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
So that's amazing. I didn't know that. Like, I'm really kind of shook right now because that guy who's now held as this big hero of, like, oh, this patient with a swastika, and he still took care of him, but it tested his compassion as a Jewish physician and so on. And compelling story. He has tried vigorously to get me canceled on Twitter for a video I did about abortion, where I dared to say, hey, I don't think we should legislate a woman's right to choose these things. However, here was my experience when I was a medical student witnessing abortions and how difficult it was for me. And he said, oh, you don't even understand. You're giving power to these anti-abortion activists and so on and so forth. And I said, I told him that I made the video that I thought was...
You're speaking to your own...
Speaking to my own experience,
right, yeah.
And also still advocated for what you're advocating for.
Right.
But he was unrelenting. We had private conversations. He threatened to make those private conversations public.
That's always a...
Oh, yeah, which is a good sign, right? Which I would have said, fine, go ahead. I told you exactly what I think of you. And so it's interesting. So again, it pulls it full circle to what these social media platforms are. They are ways for people with no power and no recognition to suddenly have perceived power and recognition at the expense of people, other human beings.
I think... Your story is quite interesting about how we're starting to live in a world where your story is your truth to yourself, and at the end of the day, it's your experience. I mean, no one can tell you how you felt when you were witnessing X, Y, or Z. Right? Only you can say that. We live in a world where everyone wants to play 4 chess moves ahead. So the thought is, well, it doesn't matter that you're saying what's true to you. How might somebody interpret that? And what might that mean? And what might that mean? And what might that mean? We're not good at this game as people. We're really not good at it. I think a lot of COVID has been the same way. It's not just, well, if you say there's seasonality to the virus, somebody might say it's not real. They may not wear the mask, and that would be bad. So therefore, we shouldn't study whether or not there could be a seasonal component. We shouldn't even talk about it or study it. That's not a way to operate in the world. You got to be able to talk about this and have a dialogue. And then to your next point, I think the other point about social media, it has been a way for a lot of people to get a lot of attention. And that is always a double-edged sword, because attention when directed at the right fronts is very powerful. But we all know, I mean, I can make up a story right now that I can guarantee you'll get, like, a billion likes. Yeah. We all know that there has long been a streak in humanity for confabulation, for just coming up with a story that, in every culture, since the dawn of time, there's always been sort of confabulation, and that can be done for very powerful effect. And I think it can be problematic. I mean, I think it is problematic if the core elements of when a doctor tells a story, no one expects all of the facts to be true because it would be very identifying, but the core elements have to be true. Like somebody had to come with, Nazi tattoos, and they had to have had COVID. Those are like two core elements of this story.
Right.
Those have to be true for the story to have integrity. And I think if those core elements are not true, a guy who denied COVID saying, I can't believe it's real as they're dying, that has to be a core truth for the narrative to have the impact it does. And it's very important that it should. And so the Wired article is very good about this, investigating, is this possibly true? Social media makes it very difficult to verify a lot of these accounts, and it incentivizes people to have such accounts. And I think it's a deep risk.
Man, and I can't tell you how many people send me these accounts. Did you hear patients are denying on their deathbed? Did you hear a guy with a swastika came in and was demanding care, whatever it was? And I'm like, yeah, I have, because about 1,000 other people have sent it to me. And yeah, I have, because I moderate my discussion groups and I see what people are posting. And social media, oh God, it really sometimes hurts me to think that this is how I spend my time, is on social media, putting content out. I don't actually sit and troll social media.
See, that's what I was trying to explain to one of our, somebody we both know who spends a lot of time on social media. This person was like, well, you're so critical of social media, but I think it's good. And I was like, what you mean by social media and what I think most of us mean by social media, it's not the same thing. Very different. I mean, you are basically a television station, of sorts, right? You're producing content and you're putting it out there. And that's really what I do mostly, because I'm doing a podcast, different, medium, but the same thing. And this person that we both know is sort of in that business too. That's not what people are doing on there. It's their whole lifeline to the other world. It's the place where they're putting their most flattering pictures up, and they're putting out a version of themselves, projecting a version of themselves that they wish they could be or aspire to be. And I think it's quite dangerous. All these times we've talked, which has been, I guess, several times we've talked this so far, we've talked about the dangers around ideas, how ideas get polarized, we haven't talked as much about the dangers of your personal integrity. I'm somebody who never says anything personal on social media.
Right.
You don't know anything I ate or drank.
Right.
You don't know any restaurant I've ever been to. No. Yeah. If you ever want to go, you're never going to know.
No one can contact trace you, man.
No one can contact trace you. You have to know. But it's. I'm not comfortable living in a world where you can like what I do on the weekends. I'm just not. I'm not going to play that game. I think it's bad. It's corrosive. We all lived. I think it was more common a few years ago, or maybe when I was on Facebook, where I would just see like people tried to, it almost feels like they're trying to travel to beautiful places and post all these pictures to show that they're living in an enviable life. And then some of those people I know, have later gotten divorced.
Miserable. Yeah.
They were not in a good place when they posted those pictures. It did not reflect what was going on.
Absolutely. You're doing it for the gram, as the kids say. Yeah. And I tell you, like, I don't do that. Like, that's not what, like you said, I'm a TV station, but what I do is actually part of the appeal of this TV station to some is that they see the completely authentic me. So, and more so behind paywall.
Yes,
which
you actually talk
where so the 8,000 odd people that support the show on Facebook, YouTube, and now we're doing locals, which is completely off that grid. It's like, was started by like Dave Rubin because he got canceled on Twitter. So I'm like a little worried it's a little righty-tighty.
You'll let the audience tell you.
Exactly. They'll tell me. But the thing is, it's totally off the social media grid. So the incentive is, well, people are paying to be there so they can have authentic conversations. And they may learn a little bit about my personal life. They may see my kids and stuff, but really it's about, hey, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get me. You're not going to get some character that I portray or anything. And that's the power and the potential of the technology. But social media, you nailed it. We're always got fear of missing out. We see our friends doing these crazy things, and you realize they got divorced. Or then worse, they've hurt themselves or something like that. And it's really a...
But I just want to agree with you about the strength of the technology, which is that, in 40 years ago, some associate professor of hematology oncology is not going to have a hour a week podcast where he talks to you about a trial, his thoughts and impressions of it. I'm glad we live in a world where you can. That's a television station. That's what I'm running. I talk about Keynote 177. I don't know if any of your audience is going to be very interested in it, but you know what I mean. Like, that's a very unique television station. there are few people who want to tune in. And thanks for tuning in. But you know, I have stations that I listen to that would never have existed a long time ago. And you're putting out a program that is a blend of, you know, entertainment, thoughtful commentary, and as you say, have said before, trying to strive towards an alt middle. Which is something that, boy, do we need.
Yeah.
And that's the strength. But I think the downside of it is that a lot of people are still figuring out who they are and what they believe. And we talked about this before.
Yeah, we did.
You know, I pity them in living in the social media world where really fantastic stories get a lot of traction. So, of course, wouldn't it be great if a fantastic story happened in your ER? Really provocative things get a lot of retweets. So wouldn't it be nice if a dying patient said, "Oh, I can't believe it's real," or something like that to your ear? And that's problematic. And I'll say one more thing. I mean, I don't know if people know this about me, but I actually don't believe in using anecdotes to really drive policy arguments. I spend a lot of time to remove anecdotes and try to do like an empirical study to show that, like, you know, on average, when you look at this situation, this happens X% of the time. Because I think we are, as people, overly persuaded by the anecdote, and we don't do a good job of stepping back and actually confronting our biases. And actually, I've had a paper that I was trying to write where I have a strong feeling and intuition about a topic, but then I asked my research assistant to say, you know what, before I write this, go look at 30 examples and let's see how often this occurs, because shit, I might be wrong.
That is what I call growing the writer, the intelligence and the thinker above sitting on this elephant that is our emotional, intuitive self. And that elephant responds to anecdote and stories. It's a story-driven creature. But the writer can either go along for the ride, or it can take a space and go, "Oh, elephant's saying this. Hey, RA, go and research this and see if my elephant's just off base." Yeah, because I have a recall bias, or there's a million biases that I could have, and we see it. And you know, it's funny. It takes someone like a Dilbert writer like Scott Adams to write a book that he called Loser Think, which was particularly, you know, provocative because he's like a Trump booster. But the thing is, he's actually a clear thinker. So he wrote the whole book about all our cognitive biases. And he's like, if someone attacks you on Twitter or social media and they're showing one of these biases, you have my permission to take a screenshot of the page in the book and share it with them. Not in a non-judgmental way. Just go, you know, this is interesting. Here's an example of a bias that you might be a victim of here.
That's very interesting.
It's really interesting.
I mean, I'll just give you one example of something where like this RA actually gave an interesting answer. Was I was once in an argument, you know, for years I've been arguing about the high and unsustainable price of drugs. And somebody came and threw in my face that say, you know, you're strangely reticent about the hospital charges. You work for a hospital, don't you? You know, and I was like, oh, am I strangely reticent? I don't know. And then, like, in fact, as a profession, we talk so much about drug prices. We don't talk about prices in proportion to their expense, like hospitals and imaging and things like that. And so I said, shoot, is this person right or wrong? And so we collected a set of, like, I forget, so many articles, and we asked, how often do the authors specifically fault high prices in healthcare on these 5 different things or 6 different things? And actually, we found that that if you look at the global landscape, that there did not appear to be a bias. It was actually roughly in proportion to the spending. So it kind of surprised me. And so I thought it was so interesting because like, I didn't look at myself personally, and maybe I am particularly critical of pharmaceutical drug prices, in part because I'm a cancer doctor, so of course it's like the, you know, huge expense in my field and my line of work. But this person had a skewed impression of the world too, because this person felt like they're picking on pharma companies. They must be disproportionately picking on pharma companies, and that turned out not to be empirically the case. And so it is funny that we all view the world through our own lenses, and sometimes the only way you can settle something is ask a third party, as I did. I asked some people who work for me, to really look into something without telling them too much about what you're really after.
You know, I'm going to tie this idea of bias back to the original. Remember, when we started the show, I'm like, someone told me I'm only interviewing Indian people. And they're like, pretty tribal, isn't it, of you, Z-Dog, since you're, you know, South Asian male. And I actually I had to take a pause and be like, wait, no, that's entirely possible. Could I be doing this and not know it?
Yes.
Because I'm not doing it consciously. And then I thought, okay, so and this is Scott Adams talks about these failures of alternative explanations that people don't even try to come up with. Yes. They just assume, they use the mind reading fallacy. So they assume they know your mind, and then they apply it to you without thinking, okay, what else could be happening? So I had to do the experiment with myself. I'm like, okay, so let me see. So the last 3 guests I've had are all Indian. Yes. All right. Let's look at the other guests I've had. Is this even true? Oh, it turns out it's not. Because, it's just like saying, you only interview men. Okay, well, why is that? Well, okay, the last 3 were men, so there's a recall bias, or proximity bias or whatever it is. And then I said, well, wait a minute, what if it's true? What if the majority of the people that I interview are Indian? Okay, let me look at where I live. I live in the Bay Area. What's the proportion of immigrants that are in healthcare? Well, it's quite high.
Because I would say that it is possible that, of course, that all of us are motivated by something that we don't see potentially bias. But I would say the things that one would think about is proximity.
Yeah.
You tend to interview people who can physically come to your studio.
Correct.
Overlapping interest. You tend to interview people in healthcare.
Correct.
The baseline, the denominator of what people's gender and race and ethnicity are. And there very likely are a lot of Indian, I don't know if this is going to be controversial, but there are a lot of Indian physicians in the Bay Area.
It's a fact. It's a fact. Go to Fremont. It's 100%. I worked there for a while.
Well, I always tell people that, I used to sit on the wards. This is not a joke. This is a true story. I used to sit on the wards when I was attending, and I don't know if people know this about me. When I attend, I almost always wear a suit, and that happened because I was an attending when I was 32, and
you had to look older than stated age.
God,
yeah,
people. I wouldn't dress in a suit, and all I would hear is, "How old are you? How young are you? When are you to become a Dr. Doogie Howser?" This,
right?
Enough of this damn patronizing me because I'm young looking. I was like, okay, fine. And then I started wearing a suit, and then that just poof, gone overnight, instantly. Nobody had ever said you look too young, and so I would go on the wards and I'd sit there in my suit, waiting for my fellow to come or something like that, so we could round. And I swear, many, many times people walk up to me and hand me an EKG and say, "Can you read this?" I say, I think so, but I'm not a cardiologist. You're not a cardiologist? I'm like, is that so much of a stereotype? I'm a hematologist oncologist. What? And they're
what? An Indian hem-onc doc? Yeah. Oh my God, dude, that's hilarious. I even made a song called One Seek, which was a parody of 1 Week by the Bare Naked Ladies, where I went through all the stereotypes. And they're stereotypes for a reason because just numerically, you could probably do a study. Now, you should do the study. Again, you kind of looking at
a lot of Indian cardiologists.
Looking at the bias.
I grew up thinking that because I grew up in Cleveland area and my parents were friends with a lot of Indian cardiologists.
Me too. Yeah. Me too. To this day, they're like, "Why didn't you become cardiologist? There's so much money. You put in the stent, and whether it works or not doesn't matter. You get paid either way." So what's funny is I wanted to come back to something that you said, which is you dressed in a suit. Yeah. Now, okay, I'm going to give props to a colleague of mine who hired me actually at Stanford. Back in the day, he came back to medicine as an older, like he had an MBA and some other stuff. And so he was like one of the older students that came back. So he was in our residency a couple years ahead of me or something. And he reached out after I'd been working in tech for a year after residency because I'd just been so burned out. And he's like, "You need to come back and do this and that." So he was always like kind of a little mentor to me in terms of the practicalities of how to be a doctor. And he used to tell me, because I was young looking in those days, he would say, "Always wear a shirt and a tie and a white coat and so on. And the reason you do that, it's the reason I let my hair go gray, is that patients are looking for an authority figure. And if you project professionalism and authority, that will help with the relationship. Yeah, and they'll listen." So that was one thing that I thought was interesting. The other thing is, then he has all these pearls over the years that are similar. So one thing, he just texted me this morning. They are getting crushed right now with COVID at the hospital. And my old group is like, half of them are in quarantine because they've been exposed. And so it's hitting the fan. And he goes, "This is what I've started doing." He goes, "Anytime I text a nurse with some request, especially if it has a negative valence, like it's something difficult, like put in a Foley or take out the Foley." You're going to be changing.
The rectal tube.
Always say thanks with an exclamation point at the end. And it changes the valence of it because it's become a courteous thing where you're acknowledging that they're doing something for you and so on. Even though you don't have to do that, it helps a lot. So these little things are about our interface to interface connection. So it is important. It has nothing to do with bias and all that, but it's our perception makes reality.
And I guess not to be a stodgy old man, but I will say that sometimes I do notice a lot of people on the wards in the ward du jour of the scrubs and the white coat. And I want to say, I got nothing against it. And look, I've been a resident too, and I wore a lot of scrubs.
Me too.
But I will say, I will encourage people to do their own investigation. Randomly assign your days and wear a suit and tie or a very professional dress, or wear scrubs and see how you like the response you're getting. And maybe it's even in your own, maybe it's in my own mind. Like I have more confidence but I do think anecdotally, and I think there are some studies, it's been a while since I looked into that literature. I think there are some studies about the physical appearance of a doctor.
Professional appearance
of a doctor and how patients respond. Yeah.
And, we could get canceled for this, right? Because this is like a Med Bikini 2.0. Like,
Don't say that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, just,
I
think, and again, you said it. You said, well, I don't sound like a curmudgeonly old doctor at 37 or however old you are. The truth is, I say it all the time because I found it empirically to be true, but you're right. If we studied it carefully.
Just let people do their own
Let
experiments.
them do their own A/B experiments.
Then if you hate us, then you hate us.
Then
you can't hate me. It's your experiment. You run it the way you want
Go
it.
run
You adjudicate the way you want
Find
it.
out.
Yeah, find
One
out.
day wear like just this really formal garb, and then
wear your wrinkly scrubs. Yep. They're always wrinkly.
They're wrinkly. They got some stains on them. They're tied up at the wrong part of your abdomen, so like it shows either too little or too much muffin top. I mean, I've done all these things, Vinay. Every single one. I've lost every single battle with fashion that could be lost. But yeah, I did notice it. It was absolutely, and especially I had a patient population that spanned the socioeconomic strata. And what I found actually really interesting was all socioeconomic strata patients responded, I felt, to a professional attire. Now, again, you could let your guard down on the weekends. You could come in with something dressed down a little. And then what was interesting is they actually felt, I got this feeling, and again, this may just be perception on my part, like you said, you need to study it, that they were like, oh, this guy's kind of a human. Like,
yeah, I always get it. Like if you dress down on the weekends, I find that people are more likely to ask you a question. They wouldn't ask you on the weekdays, like, oh, what are you doing later today? Or
right,
something
a more personal, like human to human kind of thing. Yeah.
I don't know. People should do what's right for them.
Yes.
What's right for me is to wear a suit. I have. Once I started doing it, I really liked it. And also makes my life simple because I don't have to think about what to wear.
Yeah. So John Kniff was my friend who makes these recommendations. I'm going to have him on the show at some point because he has these, he has a little chair that folds up that he carries and it looks like a little cane. And what he does, he comes into a patient's room and he unfolds the chair
like
and sits down.
So he gets
and
it level.
He gets it level and he's there and he shows that he's present. And it's these little perceptual things, right? And it's part of the healing thing. Jim Doty was on the show, he's a neurosurgeon. And he was talking about, patients seem to do better when a surgeon leans in, holds their hand, tells them, hey, this is how healing works post-op. They seem to have better outcomes. I don't know, he had some data that he was citing that I haven't looked into.
I've seen also another thing people make a lot of calls for is the bedside presentation, to have the resident present the patient at their bedside in front of them.
Right, yeah.
And offline, because I'll never say this publicly, but I had a story once where the attending...
Wait, so you want me to edit this out?
Yeah, you can edit it. You can keep this part.
Okay.
I won't say the part that's...
okay, good.
I had an attending who felt very strongly, and we went to the room, and my sub-I, I was a resident at the time, my sub-I said, for this patient, I would strongly advise we don't do this. And the attending said, no, let's do it. I promise you, it's not going to be as bad as you think. And it ended up being the absolute worst, like the worst moment I've ever seen in my life. And then we walked out of there, and I told that attending, I was like, you win some, you lose some.
Oh my God!
You're not always right, just because you're older and wiser.
That is brilliant. That's a good.
Well, I didn't tell you what actually happened, and I will take it to my grave.
And you should, because sometimes things are best left in confidence. Yeah. But just looking at your reaction, I know it was amazing.
Just not a good. The student was right. Sometimes students are right.
They're very perceptive.
Very perceptive.
Yeah, they are.
Not a good idea
because they know that patient. They've spent hours sitting there trying to extract what little history they can pull out.
Only so that the attending goes in and the patient volunteers information, then tell the student. Makes the student
every single time. Nurses complain about the same thing. Yeah. Like, they say one thing to the nurse, and then when the doctor's there, it's like, hey, guy. It's like, oh, really? Come on, man. It's all perception. It's all a little hierarchical. And I mean, medicine is just emerging out of witchcraft, really. I mean, and to some of the stuff we do, this is your passion, is witchcraft. It's straight witchcraft.
I think, and we don't think of it as such. It's been so ingrained and sterilized and formalized, but may in fact be no better than witchcraft.
Right.
A good chunk of what we do. But the other thing is, we balance it out with some things we do that are so of indisputable benefit, we get away with a little bit of.
That's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. Exactly. Dude, so I think we talked about a lot of things.
A lot of things.
Yeah. So guys, I don't even know. Just share this thing, enjoy it, cancel us. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, this was fun. So every time, we're just going to keep doing this anytime you're by.
We have to stop because I want to record you a little bit
Let's do it right now. Guys, we out. We're going to do a plenary session podcast. Check out his podcast, Plenary Session, Vinay Prasad. It's fantastic. All right, especially because I'm on it. That's probably the only reason.
Those are the best episodes.
All right, peace. Yo, did you think that was dope? Hey, become a subscriber. Click the subscribe button. Then right to the right of his little bell. Hit that bell. Booyah! You get notifications. Never miss any of our stuff. I love you guys. We out.